Football is a way of life.
This is football, chump. All you gotta do when a man gets the ball is tackle him. Get it? The man with the ball. Bring him down.
Football is about controlling that anger, harnessing that aggression into a team effort to achieve perfection. You fumble the football, and I will break my foot off in your John Brown hind parts, and then you will run a mile.
You block about as good as a jelly donut, you know that?
People can learn a great deal from a skillfully played football game.
What civilized person would play a game with the skin of an innocent pig?
Dad!
Let's talk about playing football.
Here's Danger Dean with the BNW in the PNW.
That's right. Welcome to another episode of the Broncos Northwest podcast. My name is Danger Dean, and an exciting week because this week we are leading up to free agency. It's a free agency frenzy, and we're going to get into that this episode. Welcome to the show. If you'd like to reach out, of course, there's a few ways to do so. The first would be social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. If you've got any of those platforms, all at the BNW podcast, or simply search for Broncos Northwest podcast in the search bar. I'll pop right up. If you'd like to shoot me an email, broncosnorthwestpodcast@gmail.com. And the most effective and immediate way to get a hold of me would be to give me a buzz or shoot me a text. 731-4-DANGER. 731, the number 4, DANGER. Call, text in, leave a message, and we'll share your opinions here on the show. I do want to go ahead and start this episode out by shouting out some other podcasts. The podcast community is a very big one, and it is also a very supportive one. And I think it's important that we all support each other to the best of our abilities. If you are on any of these platforms that you're listening to the BNW podcast, make sure you check out the Radio Fam podcast. If you're interested in the world of radio, if you used to work in radio, lots of good stuff with this podcast. Also, check out Quad Pod, a brand new podcasting network that you'll find this show on, and a plethora of other shows, not just sports, but all kinds of different subjects. Make sure you check it out. That's Quad Pod, QODPOD. Also want to shout out the Broncos fans of Seattle Facebook page. They're always so open and willing to share their opinions with the show, which is always welcomed and refreshing. Before we get started, I do want to tackle some confusion. Apparently, there's a little bit of confusion on my stance with the quarterback situation. I guess I've been accused of going both ways, being wishy-washy. So let's go ahead and clear this up just a little bit. As far as Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson go, I know they're big in the conversation, especially when it concerns the Denver Broncos. I would love to have either one of those guys or a caliber quarterback like Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson, but not at the monster asking price for, let's say, Watson. More specifically, they're asking for players on top of picks. And they're asking for a lot of picks, so it's not just a few picks and some players, it's a whole buttload of picks, and then some of the best players, young players, that the Broncos have on the team. So I would love that, but not at the asking price. However, if you're asking my opinion, I really, truly, honestly don't think that Denver is going to end up going this route. And I think that's where the confusion is. Because I would love to see Watson or Wilson here. I just don't think that's going to happen. I also don't think that Locke is the answer, at least right now. But I would like to see some consistency with the position, with the coaching staff remaining in place, with a full offseason. I mean, they were so high on him a year and a half ago. I'd really like to see what could happen if he has a chance to fully develop. My whole thought process basically hinges on when the Broncos decide to fill that ownership role. Because I don't think the Broncos are going to be a viable contender until an owner is in place and the trust that's there is gone. So I'd love for the answer at quarterback to come from free agency or a trade, a big name, a splash, if you will. But I think all of this is going to wield as a backup for Locke and another season with him under center. I'm going to keep my rational glasses on until the news begins to break in the next week or two. Logically, I just don't think Denver lands a big name quarterback, and I think we get Locke for another season. I hope that clears it up just a little bit. The dream scenario is just that. It's a pipe dream, in my opinion. But who knows? Maybe the team will prove me wrong and start trading some of these younger players with the picks. And even if that is the case, I'll be the first in line to buy the jersey of whoever it is they bring in as a replacement. because I'm a team guy, not a player guy.
Don't just be a spectator. Join the BNW podcast. 731-4-DANGER.
Well, the options at quarterback are starting to slim out just a little bit. Some movement with Dak Prescott. It was announced yesterday, Adam Schefter actually breaking the news that Dak will sign a new deal with the Dallas Cowboys. 4 years and up to $164 million with incentives. Interestingly enough, Russell Wilson has actually been rumored to have wanted to be traded to Dallas. So that takes one of those destinations off of his list. Could that be good news for Denver? Remember, I'm more on the side of getting Russell Wilson than I am Deshaun Watson. But Denver isn't on his extremely short list. So could probably rule that one out.
Free agency frenzy.
Tons of free agency moves and announcements that were made in the last week. Broncos announcing they will tender Phillip Lindsay. He was set to be a free agent. Now he'll at least play another year in Denver. Will they get something done before the season starts? I don't think so. If history has proven anything with the running backs and the Denver Broncos, they don't really hold their running backs to that high of a standard. And they don't treat them as well either. So maybe one more year with Phillip Lindsay under the franchise tag. And sadly, I think that might be it. And next year he's going to be needed because if they keep Melvin Gordon on, which another move I'm hoping they do, the Broncos aren't going to have him for the first 3 games with that looming suspension with the DUI in place. But them as a 1-2 punch, I think could be really beneficial for Denver next season. Where I would like to have seen something long-term done with Phillip Lindsay, I'll take one more season as long as he can return to that explosive 1,000-yard season type player that he is, barring any injuries. The Broncos also announcing they're placing the franchise tag on Justin Simmons. Now, the thought with this is not to have him playing on the franchise tag itself when the season starts. This is basically a placeholder so that they can get a deal done before training camp starts. And it sounds like that's the plan. George Paton recently held a press conference over this last week, and he said, quote, "We are completely focused on making sure Justin remains a big part of the Denver Broncos for many years to come." So the feeling out of Denver is that they're going to place the franchise tag on Justin Simmons. However, they're going to get a deal done with him before training camp starts. Happy player, happy season, or at least we hope. Speaking of the George Paton press conference, not only were Phillip Lindsay and Justin Simmons discussed, but Paton also said that he's spoken with Juwan James, and it sounds like he's going to be ready to go for the 2021 season. A lot of question marks over Juwan James, especially last season he decided he was going to sit out due to COVID. He was healthy, but he just wasn't willing to make the risk. Doesn't sound like that's going to be the case in the 2021 season. Juwan James looks to be ready to go, which is a big surprise. Let's hope that they can actually get some use out of him for the money that they've spent. Because let's be honest, 3 games for this guy, or however many games that he's played so far, just isn't cutting it. And I know that before he got here, he was a dominant player on the offensive side of the ball, but I feel like when the season kicks off, he's going to have a lot to prove. And I welcome it. I'm looking forward to Juwan James as a full participant in camp and hopefully the following season. And if not, it's just a monumental waste of time and money. Courtland Sutton, now there's a name we didn't get to hear or talk about at all last season because he was also injured. But the news regarding him is that he's actually back to running routes after ACL surgery. So things looking really good for his return to the field. Again, it kind of puts Tim Patrick's position in question. Do you give him a deal with Courtland coming back? I say yes, get a deal done. A player like that with the potential impact that he carries, you got to sign him, right? Especially if you're going to bring back Drew Lock. That was his security blanket, a phrase you've heard me use over the last few weeks. So Tim Patrick, Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, this could be something that's growing into something big. If you're throwing Hamler in there as well, I think the Denver Broncos wide receiver core is starting to look pretty nice if we can keep them healthy. And speaking of Drew Lock, George Paton did admit that they like the track that Drew Lock is on over the last few seasons, but they said they were open to bringing in competition for Drew. So it's hard to say if they're putting up a smokescreen, but it seems to me like they're still focused on Drew being the guy, at least for the upcoming season. I know a lot of Denver Broncos fans aren't going to be happy if that's the route they go. And believe me, I really wish there was something that they could do to get a deal done with one of these bigger free agents that, again, doesn't involve trading away players that the Broncos need. That just doesn't seem logical to me. What logic is telling me is that Drew is coming back for another season. And again, it kind of sounds like that's what the team is thinking as well. Michael, what would your trade proposition be?
I know a lot of people don't want to give up young defensive players to get Deshaun Watson, but I think we're in a tough spot with Bradley Chubb here coming soon because he's about to come up on a contract year. To be honest with me, I'm not super sold on Bradley Chubb. I'm not saying that he's not good, but I feel like at a number 5 spot, he hasn't been the player we all kind of expected him to be. I feel like he's just kind of underwhelmed me a little. You know, he was making good plays. Don't get me wrong, he is a freak athlete, but I feel like coming in, we're already having to pay Just Simmons a big contract this year. We're going to have to pay him next year. It's just, I feel like Bradley Chubb may be one of those players we may sit down and be like, okay, does Von Miller still have another, 3 or 4 years left in him? And if that's the case, if he does still have, 2 or 3 more years left in him, maybe Bradley Chubb is somebody that we're willing to give up to get Deshaun Watson. I know it's going to be super unpopular, but I just have not been sold on Bradley Chubb. We got number 5 pick. We passed up on Nelson for the Colts. Quentin Nelson, who has been all pro already. And, I feel like he just hasn't hit that for me. And I'm just, I feel like maybe if we get him, maybe 2 firsts and Bradley Chubb, and maybe we can get something in return for him and Watson, I think, that would be something I'd be willing to take, I'd be willing to make that trade if it was 2 firsts and Bradley Chubb for Deshaun Watson. We're definitely in a quarterback-driven league, and we need a quarterback.
Thanks for the call, Michael. I think we have to see what happens with Vaughn first, but I do agree with what you said about the pick overall as far as Bradley Chubb goes. I would have much rather have seen Quentin Nelson there, but if he's available for Bradley Chubb and, 2 firsts, then okay, yeah. But I don't think that's going to be the deal made at the end of the day. Another question mark is Kareem Jackson. Kareem Jackson, another free agent, potential free agent. Well, George Paton also said that they would love to get something done with him as well. If you have recalled over the last few months, he's been extremely vocal about Deshaun Watson coming to Denver. Of course, the two playing together in Houston. But Kareem Jackson, man, great talent, depth at the position, which we obviously saw that they needed last season. I'd love to see something get done with him. And what happens with Von Miller? The biggest question mark, one of the biggest question marks that the Broncos have this offseason, especially with all the legal trouble that Von seemingly been getting into lately. George Paton did say that they do want Von back on the team, but that hinges on what the police were looking for and what their investigation finds. As far as Vaughn is concerned, got a text message from Tuck. My man said, gotta say, Jarrell Casey just hasn't contributed considering his price tag, and I'm not sad to see him go. Of course, Jarrell Casey was released last week. Tuck goes on to say, as for the great 58, it's like this. Love what the guy has done for the team in terms of leadership and game distribution. Oh, and that one time he was Super Bowl MVP, but we're probably better off moving on from him. Reason is this: he has had some off-field issues that could begin to cause internal disruption and take focus away from the task at hand, becoming a successful franchise again. To further back my opinion, he's on the decline on the defensive side of the ball, while the rules continue to trend toward heightened offensive power. I think that we can get a guy who costs 50 to 60% of his salary while contributing 80 to 85% of his on-field success. It's a sad day, but just like any relationship, you've had your ups and downs, and it's time to move on. Maybe one more year and see how he does with the current contract. So again, we're talking about an MVP, Hall of Fame caliber player in Von Miller. However, in light of all of this stuff that's seemingly going on behind the scenes, more importantly with the law involved, it begins to turn into a risk. Tuck, my man, appreciate you. And speaking of Von Miller, the news did break this week that the police actually have cleared Von Miller of any wrongdoing. They weren't going to pursue any charges. So what does this mean for his future with the team? I know a lot of people are saying it depends on what this investigation finds on how they feel the team should deal with Vaughn. I know a lot of people, Tuck had just mentioned it here, and in the past weeks, a lot of people have been vocal about their opinion with being okay seeing Vaughn go. And as far as my take, we go back to what George Paton said, that if the police cleared him, they're willing to work with him. Well, over the last few days, Vaughn has been back in the building, talking to coaches, talking to George Paton himself. So where it did look like Von Miller may not be a part of this team in the 2021 season, it's starting to look more and more like maybe that won't be the case. Maybe Vaughn is back in the orange and blue next season. And I'm okay with that. But as we've mentioned in the past couple weeks, Vaughn's production on the field has been a little lackluster, considering what he's capable of. So if they're going to bring him back, what I would like to see is him taking that team-friendly deal, taking the price cut, and working with the team. The best weapon that the Broncos have this offseason is that cap space. Vaughn, help them use it. I could think of a few players that I would like to see them go and pair up with Vaughn and that defensive side of the ball. What about a homecoming for Shaq Barrett? Adam Schefter reporting he'll be a free agent in just mere days. If you're going to pay a player, why don't you pay a guy like Shaq Barrett? You want to talk about leadership on the defensive side of the ball, something that's kind of been lacking. Leadership as a whole in that locker room. A guy like Shaq Barrett, fresh off a Super Bowl win, that's a deal I want to see get done. Where's my checkbook?
He might look homeless, but if he asks you for money, just ignore him. It's Danger Dean and the BNW Podcast.
Last week I asked you what side of the ball needs more attention in free agency, offense or defense. Obviously, the most glaring need is a quarterback, right? But as a whole, I think the offense is in a good trajectory with the pieces they have in place. In my opinion, I think the defensive side of the ball needs the most attention as far as quantity goes. The defense needs to go back to a place when they were a serious threat to any quarterback they face, not just some of the lower tiers. Vaughn being double-teamed or being injured, that doesn't help the situation. And I know that a lot of that is preparation and game plan, but they need to figure out how they can use their most dangerous weapons effectively. Whether that be more help on the edge, some help covering the tight end, that's been a huge one, possibly bolstering the backfield a little bit. It was a serious hindrance towards the end of the 2020 season. Yes, the biggest piece that needs to be filled is quarterback, but I think as a whole, the defensive side of the ball could use a little more attention. What say you? Michael said, I would like to say defensive side of the ball, mostly in the secondary, but we are definitely in a quarterback-driven league and not totally sold on Locke. Michael is kind of thinking the same way that I am. You've got a few different pieces on the defensive side of the ball, little holes that need to be filled, one gaping hole on the offensive side of the ball. My man Kyle, he said quarterback, long-term fix, then defense. But that's just a position. That's not the entire side as a whole. Offensive or defensive. I still think defensive as a whole. Jeff said, I hate to say it, but I feel like quarterback needs attention. Not sure of what direction to go with that. I don't dislike Locke. I would like to see him develop. I just feel as though he needs some help. So what Jeff is saying is competition. Bring someone in that's going to push him and maybe elevate him to that next level. A good majority saying the offensive side of the ball. I'm thinking defensive side of the ball. So there's the conundrum. Do you fill the little holes or do you patch the big one? Patching the big one could help all the little holes that are missing. But I guess the goal is to keep the defense off the field. So if you look at it like that, maybe the missing quarterback does make the offensive side of the ball a little more vulnerable than the defensive side of the ball, even though the defensive side of the ball is missing a few more pieces. Can I just say, I'm glad we're not talking about the offensive line right now. I feel like that's been the focus over the last few years. Kind of refreshing. Kind of strange we're not trying to bury Garrett Bowles. Have your opinions heard on the next episode, Assignment Broncos Country. It's time. If they were to pull it off, which is the bigger free agency move for the Denver Broncos? Would it be cutting Von Miller or replacing Drew Lock? And why? Of course, you can reach out through social media. Got a few different options there. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all at the BNW Podcast. Shoot me an email at broncosnorthwestpodcast@gmail.com. And of course, you can shoot me a text message or give me a call at 731-4DANGER. Again, leave a message. I'll share your opinion on the show. And as always, thank you so much for joining the Broncos Northwest Podcast. My name is Danger Dean. Until next time, bye.